Chapter 3 Tumble into Cactus. The second day of the long walk, Danny planned his escape. He pulled and tugged on the rope that tied his wrists together. When a soldier rode by, he hung his head and carried his wrists in front of him like everybody else. As soon as the soldier was gone, he wrestled with the rope. By the afternoon of the second day, he slipped his wrist from the knot. His hands were free. "Danny, what are you doing?" his father asked. "Don't worry," Danny said. "I won't let the soldiers see." He retied the rope loosely around his wrists, so it looked as if he were still bound. When the waterman arrived with his bucket, Danny held his wrists together. "I could take the cup in my hands," he thought, "but I can't let him know." Danny tilted his head and opened his mouth. The soldier lifted the cup to his lips, and Danny swallowed. The waterman was in a hurry. An older woman drank too slowly, and he poured the cup of water on her face. "No more water for you today," he hollered. That night they camped by a small creek. The soldiers filled their canteens. The waterman filled 10 buckets with creek water. He and his helper carried the buckets to his wagon. "Enough water for a week," he said. That night Danny did a dangerous thing. He waited until everyone was asleep. The moon was low in the sky, and only one soldier stood guard over the camp. Danny slipped his wrist free of the rope. He crawled to the rear of the waterman's wagon and climbed inside. As quiet as a snake, he found a bag of 10 cups. He took 1 cup only, so it would not be missed. He tucked the cup under his shirt. Before he climbed from the wagon, Danny waited. When he heard nothing, he put first one foot then the other to the ground. When he was sure he was alone, Danny ran to the creek. He filled the tin cup with water. He carried the water to the old woman. She was curled up in a blanket as tiny as a child. "Here," he whispered, "I brought you a drink." The old woman woke up slowly. She batted her eyes and turned her head. She looked at the moon, then turned to look at Danny. "For me?" she asked. "Yes, but we must be quiet. The soldiers don't know." The woman nodded her head. She took the cup in her wrinkled fingers. She closed her eyes and sipped the water. When the cup was empty, she smiled at Danny. "Ahehe, thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome," said Danny. As he crawled to his blanket, Danny felt good about himself. For the first time since the soldiers came, he felt good and strong. Respect the old people, he thought. He fell asleep remembering the words of his grandmother. Respect the old people. Day after day the Navajo people walked, and every day Danny watched for his chance to escape. "Danny," his grandfather said, "you are young and eager to be free. But remember what you have seen already. You saw what happened when Mr. Begay tried to run. The soldier shot him." "I'll be careful, grandfather," Danny said. "What do you plan to do?" "Every day the waterman comes in the morning. Then we don't see another soldier for 2 hours at least," Danny explained. "If you try to run, they'll see you," his grandfather replied. "I won't run across the desert," said Danny. "I'll wait till we pass a canyon. When no soldier is watching, I will roll down the canyon wall. I'll hide in a clump of cactus till everyone has passed." His grandfather gripped Danny's hand. He handed him a stone arrowhead and said, "Keep this with you, Danny. It will protect you." "Hey, thank you," Danny said. The days were hard for Danny, but nights were even worse. For the evening meal, the people sat cross-legged, leaning against each other for support. A soldier spooned hot bean soup into their hungry mouths, 3 spoons per person. As he tasted the soup, Danny's tongue and throat burned. He felt the hot liquid flow to his stomach. He always kept the last spoonful in his mouth for several minutes, rolling it over and over with his tongue until all the flavor was gone. At night, everyone slept close together, still tied at their wrists. The desert ground was covered with crawling insects, some poisonous. Although his hands were free, Danny could not slap away the spiders and insects that crossed his chest and face. If the soldiers see me slapping a spider, they'll know my hands are free, he thought. Every evening the soldiers settled into their tents. Only a handful of guards watched over the Navajos. Danny lay very still while insects crawled over him. One night a large scorpion, his tail held high, crept slowly across the sleeve of Danny's shirt, from his wrist to his shoulder. When the scorpion came to Danny's collar, it gave a little leap and landed on Danny's neck. Danny held his breath as he watched the scorpion climb across his cheek and onto his nose. From the tip of Danny's nose, it waved its tail like a signal flag. The scorpion walked slowly across his lips as Danny watched, still not breathing. When the scorpion leaped onto his chest, Danny opened his mouth wide. His belly heaved as he gulped in the cool desert air. When the scorpion finally stung him on the ribs, Danny Blackgoat quietly laughed with relief. Anything, he thought, is better than suffocating. The next morning Danny awoke with a stabbing pain from the scorpion sting. Sunrise was still an hour away. He remembered how the scorpion perched atop his nose and waved his tail like a flag. My little friend was telling me it is time to escape, Danny told himself. Yes, today will be the day. Bread and water were served at daylight. The Navajo people stood as the watermen and 2 soldiers rowed up and down the line. Drink, the soldier shouted. If anyone took too long swallowing the water, the soldier tossed his bread to the ground and stomped it in the dirt. Danny took his cup carefully, keeping the rope around his wrists. The water cooled his dry and swelling lips. As the soldier moved away from him, Danny loosened the rope. With breakfast over, the marching began. Danny kept a keen eye out for the soldiers. He waited and watched. An hour later the road curved by a shallow canyon. Clumps of bushes grew on the canyon walls. Good hiding places, Danny thought. He stood tall and looked as far as he could see, to the front and to the rear of the line. No soldiers in sight, he told himself. Now's the time. He threw off the rope from his wrists and ducked under it. His heart was pounding. He knew he must act quickly. Leaping away from the line of marchers, he dashed to the canyon. He rolled down the steep incline. After 50 feet, he tumbled into a clump of cactus. The cactus spine stuck through his shirt and pants. He winced in pain but stayed quiet. He curled into a tiny ball, hidden from the road by thick green cactus pads. Everyone saw Danny escape. Everyone but the soldiers, that is. The Navajo walkers had watched him for days, freeing himself of his knots. They knew what they must do. With their heads bowed to the ground, they moved closer together. They closed the gap in the line. At the bottom of the canyon, Danny lay as still as a stone. He listened to the passing wagon wheels creak and groan above him. He froze when a soldier shouted, fearing that his tracks had been seen. Too scared to move, his heart pounded in his chest. I hope the soldiers can't hear my heartbeat, he thought. Danny lay in the shadows of the cactus for half an hour. He heard nothing. No horses neighing or people talking. No wagons creaking. He sat up and felt the cactus thorns. Hundreds of sharp thorns were stuck into his pants leg and the back of his shirt. He began to pick out the thorns. Suddenly his eyes caught the movement of a shadow on the ground. At first he thought a buzzard must have spotted him. He's flying low to see if I'm dead. Danny lifted his gaze in time to see a rifle butt coming in his direction. He raised his hands, but the soldier with the rifle was powerful and quick. The rifle butt struck him on the cheek. He fell to the ground, unconscious.